Hello and welcome to another Tundra Connections. I'm Alysa McCall and I'm joined today by my colleague, Geoff York. We both work for Polar Bears International, and today we are talking to you about living with the world's largest land carnivore, from resistance to coexistence. But of course, polar bears are actually a marine mammal. We consider them the sea bear or the ocean bear. But there are areas of the world and times of the year where polar bears are on land and people do come into contact with them and have to live safely with polar bears. And so that's kind of what we're talking about today. We'll talk for about half an hour, give or take a little bit. We've got some really great videos to show you. We're going to talk a bit about the history of where we are, which is in Churchill, Manitoba, sometimes called the polar bear capital of the world. And then we're going to show you how we stay safe when we're working out with polar bears. Even this morning, I was bear guarding along the coast while some colleagues of mine were filming, and I had a couple of these tools with me looking on the landscape, and it was a really great example of what we're speaking about today. If you have any questions anytime when you're watching this morning, please do put them in the chat. So wherever you're watching, whether you are on polarbearsinternational.org, explore.org, whether you're on YouTube, there should be a chat section there and you can throw your question in, and we have some awesome moderators that are keeping an eye on those questions and they're going to send them to me. So Geoff and I would be more than happy to chat about what you want to talk about. This is great. We'll get rocking. So Geoff, could you introduce yourself a little bit? Geoff's got a ton of experience and kind of, why are you kind of an expert in this stuff?
Sure. So Geoff York, Senior Director of Science and Policy for Polar Bears International, and I've been working on just polar bears for 26 years now, and in the Arctic for over 30. A lot of that time has been out on the sea ice with polar bears. It's included deterring bears, hazing bears, moving animals around, and then working extensively in that time with communities around the Arctic.
Great. And I'm one of the staff scientists on PBI. So I started coming out to Churchill in 2010 to do field work. Since then, done multiple seasons of field work and work in the field with my colleagues that are working. And it's really important that if people are doing something where there might be polar bears, that someone is keeping an eye out. And so I've had some experience with some of these things. Happy to talk to you about it today. For those of you who watch Tundra Connections and watch our events, our background might look a little different to you. So we are in a building that we affectionately call the Cable Shack. It's one of the small places that we own in Churchill next to one of our bigger houses, and it's full of all of our equipment. So we can store things very safely, cleanly, warmly when we need to. So that's where we're coming from today. So we can set the stage a little more. So I mentioned we're in Churchill. Geoff, could you talk a little bit about why are we in Churchill? Why are polar bears in Churchill?
We're in Churchill because there are polar bears in Churchill. But why are there polar bears in Churchill? So as the sea ice melts every summer in Hudson Bay, there's a counterclockwise direction that generally pushes that last remnant of sea ice over towards western Hudson Bay. Sometimes it drifts into the western part of southern Hudson Bay, and that's where bears get off the ice. Then they just wait on shore more or less where they're at until the ice comes back. And so that's why Churchill still is the best place in the world to reliably see polar bears.
Right. And it's been this way for a long time. There's a lot of stories, even, going probably way back, but people started settling here. There was fur trading here, over a century ago. And then in the 1950s, the military had quite a presence here. And some of the stories are, kind of wild. It was a time where people weren't, that concerned about polar bear conservation, wildlife conservation generally. And if polar bears were walking through this area, which they were, it's on their migration, not migration route, but it's where they, a place where they walk to go up north. And then we put a town here. And a lot of polar bears were getting killed, and it was, not very safe. So with increases in conservation mindedness and people being safe, wanting the polar bears to be in the wild, there's been a lot of interesting things happening in Churchill. This is one of the best places in the world where we can test equipment and find out what is safe for polar bears and what is safe for people. And there's some really neat examples. One kind of unique thing, there's many unique things, I guess, but one really unique thing in Churchill is the Polar Bear Alert Team. And that's a provincial government program. And maybe you could explain a bit, what is the Polar Bear Alert Team?
Sure. Churchill is incredibly fortunate to have provincial support in dealing with coexistence here. And since the 80s, they established a Polar Bear Alert program. So they have professional conservation officers who live here year round. They're augmented with seasonal staff and also then by conservation officers that are rotating up from other parts of the province. So they have, during the peak of bear season, professionals available 24/7 to respond to sightings of bears, ideally help just escort bears through town, out of town, past town, but occasionally having to intervene, capture bears either with covert traps or by actively darting them from a helicopter and then relocating them safely out of town.
And there are a lot of bears here. I've been asked that before. Do bears really come through Churchill? Are polar bears really a thing? Or is this kind of something that the tourism board sets up? Absolutely. There are polar bears around. Just driving along the coast for the last couple of days, there's bears dotting. There's a little bit of ice forming, and we can see polar bears out there. We know they're walking through the area. Out on the tundra, where the tundra buggies are right now, and tundra buggy 1 is out there at the moment, there's been plenty of bears, including a mom with triplets, mom with 2 cubs. We've got some great footage there to show you what we've been seeing over the last few days. So the polar bears absolutely are here. And at Polar Bears International, it's our goal to keep polar bears in the wild as long as possible, do what we can. And one of the ways we can do that is by setting up people for safety and to help keep these bears in the wild, but keep them out of town in different ways. So one of the really fabulous initiatives that Churchill has started over the last few years is the Churchill Bear Safe Working Group. And Polar Bears International does have a presence on it. We do not lead it. We are simply there to listen and support, but it's full of really important stakeholders in town. Maybe you could explain a little bit more about what the goals are of that.
Sure. So several years ago, the town of Churchill came to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to do more around coexistence from the town side. It's great that the province is doing their bit, but we want to step up." And then they also just wanted to have a more organized and a stronger voice on polar bear issues here in Manitoba. And so we said, sure, and helped them through hiring a professional facilitator, kind of formalize a group, set it up. And then, as Alysa said, we're a member of the group and we're there to listen and then to help support ideas as they come up. So early on, there were several tasks that the group agreed to look at. One of those was, hey, right now we're just kind of taking our trash out on trash day. We're setting it out on the ground in plastic sacks. Seagulls are getting into them, fox are getting into them, and they're totally available for polar bears. Like, let's kind of clean that up and get our waste in bear-resistant bins. And so you can see an image there of what a polar bear-resistant trash can looks like. These are for housing units with multiple houses in them. And a funny side story with those bins, too, is early on when we were bringing these things into the polar bear world from the brown bear world, we had to make them stronger. Polar bears were able to bend steel that brown bears typically did not. So working also with the manufacturers of these tools to make them, safe for the north and also stronger for polar bears.
Wow, they are incredibly strong. One thing we've also done in Churchill, which actually predated the working group, but as something that we've continued to expand on, is the coloring books. So years ago, actually, though, the province had a coloring book, and then they approached us to help kind of update it. And so we took that project on, worked with the town, and we created a safety coloring book for kids. And it, kind of talks about what polar bears are, puts them in context with the environment and with other bear species, and then has specific pages about Churchill. So the kids can see their own town in this coloring book. They can see landmarks. They can see the polar bear alert hotline number that they call if they see a polar bear. It looks like their clothing that they wear. And it's just a nice tool to be able to talk to kids and, other adults about how to stay safe with polar bears. This book has since been turned into even more versions. So we have a version in Russia for the Russian National Park. We have a version for Greenland in a couple different languages, and working on hopefully a version for Alaska and other Canadian communities soon. So there's a more and more presence of polar bears on land for longer across the Arctic, and we expect that will continue. So it's really amazing that we get to test and try some tools in Churchill that maybe we can then expand. We can see what works. We also have, so we've got Albert mixing behind the scenes. Thanks, Albert. And maybe we'll queue up some of these safety videos.
Absolutely.
So that was another initiative with the Bear Safe Working Group. They had this idea that, we have all these visitors to Churchill. There's only 800-900 people that live here year round, but thousands of people come here in the fall and now in the summer. And we wanted a way to be able to explain to people in a lighthearted way how they can help us stay safe with polar bears. And the idea is that these videos can, definitely help support locals, but absolutely be a good primer for the many, many tourists that come here. So we're going to show you a few select options, but you can also see more at the website that we'll throw in the chat here at Churchill Bear Smart. So Albert can queue up these videos. They're super fun.
Dempsey, welcome to Churchill.
Welcome to Churchill.
Welcome to Churchill.
Welcome to Churchill.
Welcome to Churchill!
Churchill is on Treaty 5 territory, the ancestral lands of the Dene, Cree, Inuit, and Métis.
Our residents are tundra tough, and we don't just mean our people.
In Churchill, our next door neighbors include the world's largest land carnivore, polar bears.
We hope that you'll have a wonderful visit and remember this for the rest of your life.
But we'd like your lifetime to continue beyond this trip, so please follow these important safety tips to have a safe and rewarding visit.
So that's a great primer. And we should mention too that locals narrated, voiced, acted, did all of this with us. So it's super fun to see the different community members. So we'll queue up the next one. And again, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can.
How fast do you think you are? Have you won any medals recently? The average person can run about 8 kilometers an hour. But a polar bear can run faster than an Olympic athlete, more than 40 kilometers an hour. So you do the math and never approach a polar bear.
That is so great. I love those kids. They did such a good job. And I think we're going to show you just one more. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're expanding this work. And then we're going to get into the actual tools we use in the field.
When you're in town, travel in groups and make noise. Bears are more likely to attack an individual than a large group. So the more, the better. You truly have strength in numbers. Stay in a crowd and be loud. At a loss for words? Be a true Canadian and sing some Celine Dion at the top of your lungs. Near, far, wherever you are. Your dad may say, nothing good happens after midnight, but in Churchill we say, don't walk outside after dark. If you're up late, you'll hear this siren play throughout the town to remind you. If you need to get somewhere after dark, call a cab. And while we're at it, if you're an early bird, it's best to stay indoors until the rest of us wake up.
Love that. Huge thank you to the Churchill Bear Smart Working Group for helping us complete those. They did such a great job, and we'll be even doing more updates to those videos in the coming year. And another great example of a tool that we can use to help people stay safe in polar bear country, and one that we hope might be expanded across the north. If other communities, especially ones that are seeing more visitors, can have some sort of safety video, it might help kind of prime people to think how to be safe in polar bear country.
And definitely some of our partners who've seen that video, they're already asking us, can we do
That's
this
awesome.
in Norway? Can we do this?
That's so great. And speaking of partners, so we have Polar Bears International has started working more in the last couple of years in some Ontario communities. So that's the province next door to where we are in Manitoba, and the province that's a little more south. Maybe you could tell folks a bit about what we're doing down there.
Sure. So shifting us over to the east, where we have the southern Hudson Bay subpopulation of polar bears, and around that part, both on the western shores of southern Hudson Bay, but then also on the eastern shores of western Hudson Bay, we have traditional Cree communities that are mostly inland, but a few are adjacent to the coast. And so these communities are starting to either see more polar bears, or some of them are seeing polar bears for the first time.
Wow. So we are working with the Ontario government and actually and Climate Change Canada, which is the federal government as well, to kind of, again, we're there to listen and we're there to support and we're there to figure out what these communities want to see and then help make that happen. And so there's been a variety of initiatives that they've wanted and that we've supported. So we've helped buy supplies, which we're going to talk a bit about more in a minute here. We've helped send in a trainer to help train people how to move polar bears away, scare them away safely. And one example is this safety handout that we made and translated into Cree. So, when in doubt, put up some posters with some information on there. So we, with the community, created some posters for folks, give them a little bit of insight into what they can do around around their cabins, around their communities to stay safe around polar bears for folks that might not be experienced with these bears. And what are kind of some of your main takeaways from here, Geoff? Like, what would you tell folks if you were living on a cabin on the coast in polar bear country? What would you be thinking of and doing, do you think?
The big ones in this part of the world, and it's the same for those of us used to living with other bear species
Right.
or other large predators, is assume they're always there. We're in their habitat. They could be here any time of the year. They're more likely now, but they could be here in July. They could be here in March. And so
Right.
just always being alert and always being ready, always carrying some kind of personal protection. We call them deterrents, but some way to respond in case you're surprised by a bear, especially in close range.
Absolutely. Yeah. At Polar Bears International, when we are in Churchill, basically every single staff member carries always one and usually two deterrents on us at all times. It really does make a huge difference. You want to keep each other safe and yourself safe. So we will get into the tools here in just a second, but I wanted to take a couple quick questions that we got in. I'm going to throw a few over to Geoff. Would someone ever see a polar bear and a brown bear going face to face? Do they overlap anywhere?
Yes, they do. They overlap right here. And so actually here in Churchill, they have all three North American species of bear: black bear, brown bear, and polar bear.
We've got another great, we were just talking about this Robert Gray. How's it going with the Cape cams? We miss seeing the action. We agree. We miss it too, but it's going well.
It's going well.
Yes.
I actually just walked over here from a meeting with
Yes.
our partners at Parks Canada, and the last pieces of paperwork are falling into place to get that new Cape cam set up much further out on the Cape. I think people are going to be really jazzed when they see where we end up.
Right. Hopefully it's worth the wait. We think it will be. So yeah, thanks for calling that out. One more quick question and then we'll move on and circle back. Are Kodiak bears almost as big as a polar bear? So the Kodiak bears, those are the brown bears that eat a lot of salmon. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so the biggest of the brown bears, which are the Kodiak bears that are currently extant or in existence,
Right.
are as big as most large polar bears. We're talking male to male here. Historically, and the heaviest polar bear that's been weighed to my knowledge here in Hudson Bay was an 1,800-pound male. You'll be hard-pressed to find a brown bear bigger than that.
Wow. Wow, they are big, and the bears that eat more calories get bigger, and bears sure love to be fat. That's the truth. So we're going to show you a few different tools, and we have some great videos. So yesterday, was it 2 days ago?
2 days ago.
2 days ago. Wow, time flies. The Polar Bears International team here in Churchill went through a training session. So those of us that work in the field or have colleagues working in the field and we might be out there with them, we went through a group training session to try these deterrents. So we can carry stuff in our pockets. It doesn't mean we know how to use them. So we brought in a trainer. We spent the whole day. Luckily, we could not have gotten beautiful weather. Like, it was the most beautiful weather. And then we went through a bunch of exercises, and I'll let Geoff kind of explain what's going on here.
Sure. So you're just seeing kind of some of the options on the table, but we went out and did both daytime and nighttime training. We trained on things from bear spray to various firearm launch deterrents. So these are all things you can use a 12 gauge for. You can see on the ground there, one of the drills was to fall down as if you've been knocked down by a bear. Keep your bear spray where you normally would and see if you can get it out and deploy it quickly over your head because the bear is on your back. So that's the scenario you're seeing acting out here.
Yeah, I did not do well. It was so good for me to practice. And we should say too, so what we're using here, they are inert bear sprays. So there are these fake bear sprays that you can buy in the store and you can try them out to see how to use them. We didn't just use full-on bear spray. We would all still be coughing. But if you can find those, apparently Canadian Tire in Canada sells them. I do think it's really worth the effort if you are being out in bear country and you've never used bear spray. For me, I realized my hands are a little bit small. And so I need to use a bit of a different technique. It was very helpful to be doing this exercise. Great. And then so we moving on to the next bit that we were doing. I think here is Gord counting out steps. Oh yeah, that's how you flick the cap off. Perfect. Oh, and so one of the tricks too is if there's a bear approaching you, you wait till the bear's pretty close, right?
Yeah, you're talking
Right.
2 to 4 meter range. So you have to stand your ground and be patient and make sure that bear is actually a potential threat before you deploy bear spray.
Mm-hmm. And you want to shoot the bear spray kind of at the bear's feet. So when it's coming into that cloud and lifting its head up, it's getting the face full. If you spray where you think its eyes are, then it might drop its face and not as effective. Is that right?
It might go under. When bears are coming in, especially in more of that potentially predatory way, they have their head down on the ground. So you want to get that cloud right down where their head is.
Mm-hmm. So good tricks there. Okay, so we can move on to the next section. There we go. So that's where firing off some, what were those, the cracker shells?
These are cracker shells. So these, again, are deterrent rounds that you can use in a standard 12-gauge shotgun. The nice thing with this is when you're in bear country, it isn't a bad idea if you have the training, the license, and the experience to carry a firearm. But it's really nice if that firearm can do multiple things. And so the 12-gauge in the bear world, the 12-gauge shotgun is kind of a Swiss Army knife or a multi-tool where we can put a lot of different less lethal rounds in there to keep bears away, keep them at a distance from a range. And you're seeing some of those here. Everything from, you see a flare being launched there, so you can light up an area at night. These were 2-person drills, so the one person launches a flare, the other person has rubber baton rounds that go out and actually make impact with the bear at a distance. So first you light it up, and then you can hit it with something. And so the next time when you shoot a flare off, that same bear is likely to go ahead and run without you having to do anything.
Mm-hmm. That association. Yeah, and again, so all of the things we did the other day, all were non-lethal to bears. We didn't have a single live round. We weren't firing slugs. We were doing rubber bullets, flares, cracker shells, bangers, the things that would be our absolute go-tos in the field. And it was really great practice. And I'll also mention that every one of us who is on this range right now using these, except maybe the one of the photographers, we all have a PAL in Canada, which is a possessions and acquisitions license. So there is a course you go through in Canada to handle these sorts of firearms. And all of us have a license or have at least taken the course and are just sending in for the license now. So we want to do things as safely as possible and be really prepared for working in the field.
And you can see on the videos here, at least some of them, we had amazing northern lights out when we were doing this.
It was nice.
It was pretty cool.
It was so cool. It was just a beautiful night with northern lights, firing off flares and practicing protecting each other. It was a really great exercise. Perfect. Well, thank you. Thanks, Albert, for showing all of these. We got some really great footage that day. We're super appreciative. I guess if you've got any questions about deterrence, we can also put some information in the comment section. We have some examples we can show you, but it's really something that we do encourage. And along with deterrence, of course, stay in a group, be loud, watch where your food is, secure your food, all these good tips. We don't walk around after dark, definitely not alone. We do everything we can to stay safe. And if we're staying safe, we're also helping a polar bear stay in the wild. So doing what we can. Geoff, what would be next for polar bear safety across the North? So as Polar Bears International in particular, but the North in general, looks ahead to a warming world and bears on land in more places more often, kind of what's next?
As an organization that's trying to keep bears around always, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to the people who live, work, and recreate in the North to keep them safe, and to keep polar bears safe. But it's very much about that human safety aspect. We're a fairly small organization. We can't be everywhere.
Right.
I don't think we'd want that much travel, even if we could. And so we're looking at how we can scale out our work sustainably, and that will likely be through a train-the-trainer approach in terms of using some of these tools, and then definitely connecting communities with other communities. So creating peer groups of communities that are living in polar bear habitat and letting them have discussions together, convening them so they can share the things that are working and share their concerns.
Right. knowledge sharing is so powerful. Thanks for that. We are going to take a few more questions. This is actually a really great question that I've never really thought about. I've kind of just gone the default, but how much supply of bear spray or other deterrents should a hiker bring in a walking trip? I mean, I guess it depends on the area, but what do you usually do?
Generally, just keep a can on you. And this
Right.
is why we often say have 2 deterrent options.
Right.
Personally, up
Here's
here,
one
I
option.
carry 3.
Right.
And it's a matter of kind of what activities
spray,
you're
one of
doing
these.
and, the duration of your trip. I really like a combination of something like bear spray or, some of these bear banger devices that can launch objects with a handheld flare.
This is a flare. You just pull the top and it becomes almost like a torch, little mini torch. And it's just really, you can imagine it would keep a bear away with that flame that lasts for about a minute.
Yeah, the marine handheld flares are fairly short-lived. They're extremely bright. They're also great for their intended purpose of signaling. They can also start a fire in an emergency situation. So you have a tool that can do 3 or 4 different things.
Right. That's very handy. Well, yeah, it just makes a lot of sense to look at your options. What do you need? What can you double up on? Yeah, see what works for you at where you are. The next question. Oh, this is a great question. Can polar bears see in full color like we do? Would they be deterred more by any type of colored flare? This is great. And actually, maybe we should talk about kind of the deterrence testing we have coming up.
Yeah, no, great color. As far as we know through research and physiology of bears' eyes, they can see quite like we do. They can see in color and they have excellent eyesight. With bears, much like dogs, except even more so, their primary way of seeing the world is through their nose. But they use all 3 senses, and then also their hearing is excellent, and they can hear both above and below where humans can hear as far as their hearing range. But it definitely gets into the deterrence testing. There are a lot of things out there that we know work well with bears, at least in some circumstances. There are a lot of things we don't know. And so your question about color, is there something, a certain type of light, a certain sound, a certain scent that might deter a polar bear? Well, we're going to actually start digging into that with some of our academic partners and, look for what could be new, useful tools to expand our deterrence toolbox. And that's one thing I will say with this sort of work, there isn't one correct answer for every area, every community. I think it's good for people to look at, the whole scope of tools that are out there and then choose what's legal where you live and what fits your context and your culture.
Right. Everyone has, different needs and accessibility to different tools. But I'm very excited about the deterrence testing. I'm so curious. I will be so curious to know if there are any smells polar bears do not like. Yeah, I'm very excited about that.
There are a lot of smells they do like, or
right.
at least interested in.
Yes, they're so curious. What will turn them away? Are there polar bears from Russia and Alaska and Canada? So do polar bears kind of move amongst these different countries very often, or do they kind of stay where they're at?
Yeah, so historically, we've seen mixing in neighboring areas. So Alaska is a great one. If you think of the Chukchi Sea between the U.S. and Russia, absolutely. We have mixing in that area. Female bears that we captured and collared along the Alaska coast would den on Wrangel Island in Russia. So we know there's a lot of mixing, and that's a huge area.
Yeah.
If you look at that on a map, we see the same between Canada and Greenland. We see a little bit maybe between East Greenland and the Barents Sea, and then definitely between the Barents Sea and the Laptev Sea, where they join up there in Russia. Historically, too, and we know this mostly through genetics, but through a couple of collared bears over the last 40 years, that every now and then a bear just goes on a long walk. And so one of the bears we collared in Alaska went straight across the pole to Greenland.
Wow.
And as far as we know, stayed. Fell in love, met a bear, had a family.
Tale as old as time. Yeah.
And so we know there is just enough mixing that at a course level, polar bears are very similar genetically. We see as we drill down quite a bit of difference genetically among regions and subpopulations. But at a very high level, there has been historical movement and sharing.
Super interesting. Yeah. They really are incredible. Thanks for that great question. And here's a really relevant question right now. Does temperature affect the usefulness of bear spray?
Yes and no. So this was one of our first deterrent research questions that we worked with partners to address is, does temperature, age, and wind affect bear spray. These were all concerns we heard from people in the north specifically, because it is cold and windy up here, especially in Churchill.
Oh, yeah.
And so we did lab tests of this. And the answer for cold is at the coldest temperatures we tested, we still were able to get a 2-meter spray. Spray wasn't as good, but we had a nice stream of bear spray at 2 meters. Interestingly, when colleagues came out with a paper that looked at real life incidences where bear spray was used on polar bears, average distance people pulled the trigger on bear spray was 2 meters. So best thing is to keep it warm, but if you forget, it'll still work close range, even in cold. And we found similar with wind, it would have to be, literally a class 5 hurricane before you'd have trouble deploying it in that, again, 2 to 3 meter range. And if it was blowing that hard, probably you wouldn't be outside, and probably the bear wouldn't be outside.
Right.
Or at least moving around.
Hopefully. Excellent point. Yeah, bear. We do hear that sometimes. There's a lot of, I don't know if it's distrust about bear spray or some myths, but evidence shows it's highly effective, and we carry it every time we're able to carry it when we're in bear country. Absolutely. Thank you for that. We got a question about the kind of brown-looking polar bear we saw the other day on the Tundra Buggy Lodge cam. So we saw some of your screenshots. Yeah, that does look super brown, but we did talk to everyone that was out on the Tundra that day. We talked to the lodge staff. We took other looks at that bear in different lighting, and we think, yes, it is a bit of a dirty polar bear. We think maybe he's made a nice daybed in the soil somewhere inland, potentially all summer. He needs a really good ice bath, but it is a polar bear, and he's a bit of a smaller guy. He's a polar bear who needs a bath, but really great screenshots. So there were a couple that made us double look. So we were wondering, and like Geoff said, brown bears do live up here, so it's worth a second look. But he's going to go hopefully get clean here pretty soon, now that he can start getting out a little bit there's a little bit of ice forming along the coast, and some of the bears are trying. It's not big enough to really get them out there yet. That's going to take a while.
Yeah. When we see animals that dirty, which we do in different places, it's usually an indication they've had access to a larger marine mammal carcass, something on the scale of a walrus or a beluga whale.
Yes.
And they will get that oil, from feeding on that carcass all over them, and then they're on land. And this year it was historically dry up here in Churchill.
So
it was
dry and
incredibly dusty. And so you could see being here how that bear could get so dirty, because all of us were getting dirty.
We're all dirty. All our equipment is covered in dust. Yeah, he probably is a very dusty bear. Well, good point. We've got a question from Explore. Is it known how long polar bears can dive and the distance time without breathing? So there was a polar bear recorded in Svalbard diving for seaweed several years ago, and I know he was holding his breath. The max was 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Do you know what distance it was? Several meters.
It was around 30 feet is the deepest they could go.
Wow.
And we've seen similar with brown bears diving for salmon carcasses in Alaska.
Oh, brown bears there too. Yeah. Well, bears are great swimmers. Polar bears are excellent, excellent swimmers. So yeah, they can hold their breath. Now, they don't usually dive for seaweed, but that was quite a hungry bear, so that will do it. So we've got another question. Well, this is a nice question, Brenda. How does one get involved working with PBI? It's a great question. We do have a small team, but there's lots of ways you can get involved with us. So a great place to start is by checking out our website, polarbearsinternational.org. There's ways that you can get involved helping support us broadly by using your voice and your vote. Check out our advocacy toolkit. There's ways that you can be a voice for polar bears, kind of plug into what we're doing, get on our mailing list. We send updates regularly throughout the year. So Churchill's our favorite time of year. We get to see each other. We get to see the bears, but we are working 365 days a year all across the Arctic, doing really cool stuff in different places with different partners. And maybe there's a great way that you could see to plug in and any of that. And of course, check out our social media, and we're going to give updates constantly about what we have going on and see if there's something you want to get involved with. Thank you for asking. Geoff, I'll throw this to you, but we can, I think, tag team. What are the positive and negative human impacts on the Arctic ecosystem? That's a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to rattle off more of the latter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. First and foremost, climate change, basically carbon pollution, impacting increased warming and really negatively impacting polar bear habitat. By far is the biggest thing out there that we are doing, and mostly we in the South.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the sad things is the North is being disproportionately impacted. The Barents Sea population, where we work in Svalbard, that's warming up to about 7 times faster than the rest of the world, it looks like. Along with that, climate change is the number one threat to polar bears due to sea ice habitat loss. It means that they can't go access their food at the same rate that they should be able to. But along with that, as this ice breaks up and there's less of it, we're seeing more shipping, which is more disturbance. We're seeing more drive for maybe oil exploration. We're seeing a lot of pollution and plastics come up to the Arctic. There are a lot of human impacts that we could be doing a much better job at managing. And at Polar Bears International, it is our goal to conserve wild polar bears into the long term. That number one means switching away from fossil fuels toward cleaner energy sources like solar or wind or water or whatever you have available. And you can help us use your voice and your vote to push your officials, representatives, corporations, governments to make those options more accessible and affordable to you and your communities. But we can also do a lot of things, well, just honestly keeping, our conversations going about this stuff. We shouldn't be seeing so much plastic in the Arctic. We, should be protecting the habitats, not just for polar bears, but for all the wildlife.
Yeah, and it really touches back around to the topic we started with of conflict, is bears are killed in conflict around the Arctic. And that's something that we can mitigate to some extent. We can't eliminate it. There's always going to be some risk, but we can definitely make that as close to zero as possible.
Right. And Churchill is a great way, again, to kind of test some of those things and see what works and to help, just even inspire people about polar bears. The footage that we've captured out on the buggies in the last couple of days, thanks to Frontiers North Adventures and Explore.org for helping us live stream that. The footage has been absolutely incredible. Yesterday, I watched a mother polar bear nurse her triplet cubs, which is something I've never seen before. And it gives you hope, and it gave me so much inspiration, and it just is really motivating to keep doing what we're doing and talking to people and pushing for the changes we need to see for those future polar bear families, for those cubs that are facing an uncertain future, and for ourselves that deserve a protected future. So it all fits together. We can stay safe in different ways, short-term and long-term, and keep those polar bears in the wild. And with that, we'll start to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Geoff, for joining me today in the Cable Shack to talk about staying safe with polar bears. And again, we can share some of this information with you in the chat. Please do check out our website and our mailing list. If you are a teacher or a parent that's interested in more materials and lessons, we have our education center on our website that has really great free educational resources for different ages, all based on polar bears. And many of them are based on actual polar bear data if you've got a math class or something like that. And this sort of thing we also think fits very nicely into a social studies class if you are kind of talking about human influences in human and wildlife. Please also take our feedback survey if you can, if you're interested. It really does help us cater what we're offering teachers and how to make sure that we are being more useful to you, which is our goal. And please continue to check out what we're doing for the rest of the season. Tomorrow we have a lovely live chat with Katie Miller and Georgina Berg about community living with polar bears. So it's kind of a beautiful extension of this chat, which is a bit more safety. But Katie and Georgina work together on a specific study looking at kind of how humans and polar bears live together in Churchill. And I'm really looking forward to that one. And then next week, we start to wrap up our official polar bear season, but we are around as long as the polar bears are around, and we'll be out there live streaming the tundra every day. We've seen all sorts of great stuff this year. There's been wolves on the tundra, cool birds, Arctic foxes. I even saw one this morning. So it's just really special to be here at this time of year. Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you on the tundra soon. Bye.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.